It's my absolute pleasure to be moderating this next session on moving business, ports, paths, and progress. In the next 45 minutes or so, we intend to have a conversation on the transformative but currently untapped potential for connectivity in Africa, thinking about it in terms of business and trade, and looking at it within the continent, the potential of expanding trade and business within the continent, but also linking to the greater globe. So we'll basically be examining the role of infrastructure, ports, trade routes, and the resources that are necessary or required to realize the ambition of a connected and thriving continent. So we'll discuss some of the major risks and the impediments to the progress that we seek, and the role of government and investors in creating this, the conditions that can fast-track the realization of Africa's great potential. So that's the topic that was assigned for us to discuss this morning. And to do this, I'm joined by an exceptionally capable panel of experts, and they've already been introduced to you. So I think we'll just jump right into the discussion. And I'll start with you, Donald. And so basically, when we think about trade, growth, and connectivity on the African region, obviously it's been said, and it's a fact, that the region holds great potential, both for its strategic positioning, the geographic location, but also for the enormous resources that the continent holds. So, but the realities on the ground represent a stark difference. We do not see the advancements that the great potential holds. So my question to you, my first question is, in your view, what are the main barriers, or what have been the great impediments, whether political, economic, or institutional, that have hindered Africa from bridging these great infrastructure and connectivity gaps? And would greater connectivity have a welfare effect and bring stability to the region?
No, thanks very much, and greetings to the listeners here in this discussion and participants. Look, it is true that the greater connectivity will obviously play a major role in terms of increasing the welfare of our people, but also in terms of facilitating trade, because these two are interlinked. But what have been impediments, I think, over years, one is from the transport point of view, is one, the issue of the rail infrastructure network, which is not really connected in the continent, especially linking our products to the port of exit in terms of our port, whether the ports here in the country, the 7 ports that we have, which are exit points mostly from the African continent, especially the SADC region, but also that being the first, but also the road network. What are the challenges in these two? First, the lack of connectivity in this rail network, maintenance thereof, but also the challenges of road infrastructure. Over years, you would have seen, especially in the region, where most of the goods are moving now from rail to road, and they've also came at a serious cost, damaging the road, making it difficult, also causing accidents on the road, making it difficult for smooth transition of goods. This has a far-reaching implication in terms of our trade, in terms of our export. You would have seen in the recently also the instability, some political instability from time to time that happens, riots, just like we have seen recently in Mozambique, where there's been blockages. This undermines this particular effort of the integration in terms of ensuring that we have a smooth transportation of goods linking to the port, obviously linking this to the external out of Africa market, to the global market. So I think those are some of the major challenges that we actually have. And if we can be able to deal with that, invest more in the rail infrastructure, invest more in the maintenance of our road, and also expansion thereof, we can go a long way. And that, if we can be able to win that, that will obviously have a long-term effect in terms of the welfare of our people, because we'll then be able to have our economies running at or growing at a faster rate. And when they grow in a faster rate, because of our ability to link with the external markets, we'll then be able to create much needed jobs for our people, especially for the young people in the region.
Thank you. Thanks, Donald. William, to bring you in, my next question is, expanding that trade and connectivity comes with the various risks and presents various risks potentially for business. Some could be economic, political. In your assessment, from a business perspective, are those political risks too high for businesses, or are there effective strategies that companies like DP World, for instance, could use to navigate and mitigate these challenges?
Hi, thanks for the question. I think as business, we look at risk in two ways. So when we look at risk, risk drives the return we need on investment. So when we're considering risk, we consider country risk, we consider currency risk, we consider stability of supply and demand. And I think then specifically in terms of connectivity, you need to look at risk in terms of supply chain. So, the higher the risk in terms of business risk, the higher return we need. But when you look at supply chain risk, you must look at volatility of supply, you must look at volatility of demand. You then need to look specifically, to build on what Donald said, lots of the cargo into and out of the continent travels extended route times of up to 60 days. Half of that time can be waiting time. Because of that, our customers build in buffers into their supply chain. They are different because of constraints at different loading points or different exit points to the continent. You have different routes to get cargo out that logistically don't always make sense, but to get the volume of cargo in and out, you have to take routes that are less cost effective. And I think we also talk about, the availability of supply. We assume that we have a fixed supply of vehicles or a fixed supply of assets. These move, so you're also then battling with that. So, and I think if you consider the product that moves in and out, it's also volatile from supply. So lots of agricultural products out, there's a season to those. Those are preceded by fertilizer in, also very seasonal. If you look at the minerals that go out, those are linked to price and they trade it. So also very volatile. So we have large supply chains that carry both country risk and supply chain risk. Both of those impact on the efficiency. So the efficiency and the price required. So the return that businesses need. So high risk equals high return. High supply chain volatility and high supply chain risk means lots of buffers, and inefficiency, that means a higher cost, which makes us less competitive. So I view the role of public and private partnerships to decrease the risk on both sides. If we can decrease the risk on both sides, give certainty to business, open up longer terms, investment horizons, and we can give certainty to supply chains, understand transit times, understand capacities, we can reduce the total cost of goods coming into the continent and reduce our cost of goods going out. So either we make more money or open up more opportunities. So, and often this is built into the price of goods sold or the price of goods bought. So it's not that obvious, and it's a hidden cost, but it really costs the continent dearly. And if we can improve this catapults our competitiveness on the global scale.
Great. And this is a question that I'll ask all of you to think about. Financing for this, the kind of expansion that we seek, is obviously not cheap. Building infrastructure is not cheap. So in terms of thinking about innovative financing models or partnerships that can help us unlock this potential, Konstantinos, you can try respond to that partly as I come to these others. But my specific question for you was regarding balancing progress and sustainability. I know from your background that you've worked, you've been involved in regional collaboration and sustainable development, and so you understand the importance of balancing economic progress with environmental preservation. So now my question to you, how do we build the ports and paths of tomorrow without further degrading the environment that we currently rely on? And yes, we can start there before I come to the question of comparative.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Yes, first of all, I would like to say that this lack of connectivity that we see in Africa reminds me also of similar situations of different scale, of course, back to my region in Southeast Europe, in the Balkans, where in the last in the post-Soviet Union era, we saw this lack of connectivity creating a huge problem inside the region. To give you an example, until a few years ago, to go from Belgrade to Sarajevo, which is now 4.5 hours drive or 40 minutes flight, you need to take a flight and go to Central Europe, to Vienna or Frankfurt, and then coming back, which is of course easier than taking a bumpy road that led to nowhere, and it created also a number of other obstacles. So coming back to Africa, what we have seen also in the Balkans is that fostering connectivity, improving connectivity, basically it helps also to boost regional cooperation, trade, and development for a very obvious reason, and that is that greater connectivity creates economic independence, and at the end also same interests among the countries. So why fighting when you basically can gain from being connected to one each other? Especially in the case of Africa, that's very important because ports play a key role and will continue to play a key role, with 16 African countries being landlocked, and landlocked countries, developing countries having at least 20% less lower development rates than coastal ones, we can fully understand how important this is. And and to answer your question, international partnerships can play a key role. Coming from Europe, I know that European Union has not been always in the forefront of supporting Africa, but I can say at least that with the new Commission and the EU Global Gateway initiative that promises 150 billion euros for mostly for infrastructure and connectivity projects, there is a possibility of cooperation through these projects, and bearing in mind the blueprint that the European Union has in ECG, in sustainability, environmental, and social standards, it can be helpful. But of course, any kind of international cooperation, I should say, should focus mostly and have a major one factor, and should be that it should fully align with the priorities, the local priorities or national or regional priorities of Africa, in order to be in a position to build also political trust. But again, for something more specific, and I will finish with that, when it comes to balancing growth and implementing environmental standards, usually we think about the bigger picture and what can be done at international level. I think we should look inside Africa, and there are very good examples. For example, the case of the port of Berbera, where DP has invested a major, like 440, I think, $million, is a good example. The port of Tangier in Morocco, which is the first eco-port in Africa. The port of Mombasa is doing very well when it comes to implementing environmental rights. So I would say, yes, let's see at the good practices that are taking place inside Africa. The African Development Bank is playing a major role, and there are major initiatives that can contribute to that direction. And when help comes, or support, because I don't like the word help, comes from the outside, it should be fully aligned with what has been already achieved inside the region.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for that. So I'll come back with some follow-up questions, but in the next few minutes, we'll also allow questions from the floor. So maybe you can prepare those. But coming back to you, Donald, some of the failures that we see on the continent are a reflection of our institutions, in my view. And so I was just curious, what, in your view, is the role of regional organizations like the African Union or other regional communities in addressing the gaps that we see, the connectivity gaps that we see, and how can they better coordinate efforts across borders?
Look, thanks once again. Like we have said, first and foremost, the stability in the region becomes very, very important. One, for protection of the very infrastructure, and for ensuring that there is interest in investment in this infrastructure. Now, bodies like the African Union, to a great extent, have been playing a very important role, together, of course, with the regional bodies, especially like SADC, playing a very important role in ensuring that we derive this political stability that we need, ensuring that there is peaceful transition in terms of government, political management thereof in countries, in various countries, so that you have stability. Of course, this has not been without challenges, because if you go to the center of the continent, you always have challenges of this political instability thereof, which to a great extent, when there is political instability, roads infrastructure, rail infrastructure, they get damaged. Thus, this undermines this particular connectivity that we strive for. But also it creates uncertainty, especially from the business point of view, in terms of saying, can we invest in this infrastructure? Because if there is no stability, you run a risk in a situation where you invest in the infrastructure, it gets damaged during wars and so forth. But if you can look into the progress that we've been recording in the Southern Africa, in the SADC region, of course led by the SADC and the governments in the region, trying to ensure that there is stability. That to a great extent has assisted with the little progress that we have been making in terms of the road network, and particularly the road network. But of course, it is not without challenge. There are still challenges. One of the challenges, like I would have said earlier on, is how best do we expand what we have? How do we also rehabilitate, especially the rail network? Because if you do not have a strong rail network, you're going to have a lot of the goods being transported on the road, and the road cannot be able to sustain the volumes that we actually need to sustain these economies. So the institutional bodies have a very important role to play, ensuring that political stability, ensuring that there is a peace in the region, but also ensuring that there is investment, not only in terms of industrial development, but that road infrastructure, rail infrastructure, transportation network support this much needed industrialization in the continent. So I think that's the role that they must be able to play. But also coming to the issue of financing that you earlier on asked to colleagues, I think progressive institutions such as the BRICS banks, African development banks, have to come on board to invest in this infrastructure that is needed, because we cannot industrialize the continent. We cannot be able to achieve what we want to achieve. We cannot even be able to beneficiate our minerals that we are endowed with in the continent, as long as we are unable to move from goods from DRC peacefully to South Africa, or a good being able to move copper from Zambia to South Africa, or anywhere in the region, or even from the Central Africa to our part, if we do not have these networks. But that will require stability, but that will require our progressive institutions, a financing institution like African Development Bank, to come on board and understand that for us to achieve what we have to achieve, we need first to invest in this connectivity infrastructure. Thank you.
Great. Coming back to you, William, and I think you articulated the question of risks very clearly. I just had a follow-up on that. So what do you think are some of the most critical factors that businesses should then consider when deciding to invest in connectivity projects in Africa, especially in the regions that have high political and economic volatility?
So thanks for the question. So we would always base a business decision on the principle of willing buyer, willing seller. We would say, is there a need for this? Does the macroeconomic market make sense? So if we just consider volumes coming out of the copper belt, we see the global demand increasing for that over the next 5 years, somewhere between 10 and 20%, depending on who you ask. We think that's an ongoing commodity that will continue to have to move out of the continent. So I think business, we would look for that. We'd say, if you also think of the macroeconomics of Africa, the population is going to grow, somewhere to the region of 2 billion by 2050. So there will be more need to bring food in. Food security will become a key a key part of the discussion in coming years. So that will require connectivity. So if you consider DP World's position, DP World is bullish on Africa. We've invested $3 billion in the last 3 years. We look to invest approximately $3 billion in the coming 3 years. And we think Africa needs connectivity to become more competitive, but it also makes long-term financial sense. So we would look for, as DP World, we look for opportunities of scale. We'd look for public-private partnerships. So we'd look for a willing buyer on the public side. And then we'd look for an extended term. So we understand that there's volatility in Africa, but if you have an extended term or a 20-year or 30-year concession, you can work around volatility. So business is looking for some level of certainty of returns in the long term, and looking to make sure that the macroeconomic trends are tying back with the business and investment decision making. So I think about investment, it's about creating a place that business wants to come to, creating certainty about rules. I think the rules themselves are less important than the certainty, building on what Donald said, and then the business should naturally come. I think there's lots of opportunity.
Great. My last question to you, Constantino. I alluded to the fact that I'll come back to the question of sustainability and the comparative best practice. So my specific question to you was, are there global best practices or regional initiatives that Africa could draw inspiration from, from your assessment?
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, when it comes to financing, which is very important, just to give a figure, the World Bank estimates that Africa needs approximately 170 billion euros annually for infrastructure projects, and right now we lack approximately 68 to 108 billion dollars, not euros, I'm sorry. So we understand that the numbers are very big and there is much more to be done. And I will agree with William that it's very important to focus a lot on public-private partnerships, engage also the public sector. Through the engagement of the public sector, we can also gain more best practices when it comes also to sustainability, when it comes also to protection of the environment. But again, I will more or less say what I said before. What is very important is, yes, of course, there are international best practices. There are many measures that can be implemented in Africa as well, but it's very important not to forget that anything that should be done in Africa, and that applies not only for Africa, should have one word in mind: ownership. When it comes to infrastructure projects, I'm not talking about the ownership of the projects themselves, but also the ownership of the ownership of the process that leads to the implementation. So there are many good practices inside Africa from country to country. For example, the African Development Bank has a great initiative about I think it's called African Port Upgrade or something like that. I don't remember the exact name, but there are concrete initiatives inside this process. We should mitigate them better and make sure that whatever is done has that in its heart. Otherwise, and that applies also to the local society, the civil society. There are so many organizations in South Africa, the, environmental organizations in many parts of Africa. They should have a say, they should have a role in order to be able to have this kind of ownership that we're talking about. It's not only the process itself, it's not only the project and its implementation, it's what this project is going to offer to the country and the region in the years to come.
Absolutely, and I like the suggestion for ownership solutions that are homegrown for easier ownership. So I'll open this up now to questions. Yes, I see a hand here. You can go to the mic here. I see two more hands. Please take the mic. Let us know your name and who you'd like to address your question to. We can start here.
Thank you very much. My name is Uyi. I'm from Nigeria. It's not specific. I'm not addressing it to anybody specifically. I just want to speak on public-private partnership. No, we've spoken about it. Given the fiscal deficits, fiscal fragility we have in Africa, I really don't think there's any other way to go in terms of developing infrastructure. So here's my question. I know DP World is in that space doing something. So my question really is, I want to know what word will I use now? A case study that has worked. You know, if you could share a case study that has worked, where government and the private sector have actually worked to develop, you know, a landmark infrastructure that has led to growth and sustainability on the continent. I just want to know a case study. You know, if we know that, then we can scale it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go there. Yes, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Alexander Aloshin, Primakov Institute of World Economy and International Relations, Russian Academy of Sciences. My question is about connectivity of South Africa with Central Asia, Russia, and East Asia, and West Asia. So we have a great potential for trade, for investment, and so on, in minerals, in energy, in medicine, and so on. But now our partnership is underdeveloped. So what do you think should we do to make our partnership better?
My name is Prince Wilfred from Nigeria. Africa Continental Free Trade, basically promotes, a unified and common market for African countries for growth and development. So my question really is, we have so many challenges which are also perceived to be opportunities. Like he was saying, the man on suit, infrastructural deficit. He was only emphasizing on rail and transport. He didn't talk of digital challenge and some other infrastructural gap. Then we also have digital divide itself, which is also a challenge because many countries in the sub-Saharan Africa are not, don't have access to affordable internet. You agree with me? Then the third one, we have, trade agreement itself. Trade agreement is supposed to be a largesse, or it's supposed to be benefits to African sub-Saharan when it comes to, unified common market for the African countries. But some countries tend to look at it in a lopsided way. It doesn't favor some countries. So I really want you to, if you can, bring out those inbuilt challenges of the trade agreement, which some countries tend to look at that they are not being favored. I mean the trade agreement itself. I don't know if you got the question. Trade agreement of ACFA, Africa Continental Free Trade, it's a challenge to some countries. So I really want to bring out some inbuilt challenges. It ought to be a good opportunity. It ought to be a benefit for agri country within the African South. But some countries tend to look at it like a challenge. Because of the lopsidedness, it doesn't favor them. So I just wanted to bring us some of those inbuilt challenges in the trade agreement. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I'll start with you, Donald. I think you can try to respond to the first question, or any of you who would like to give an illustration of a case study that has worked, that can be demonstrated, and we can start here.
So we have recently taken over a port on the East African coast. Prior to us taking over the port, the ships were in harbour for on average 35 days. And obviously that affects shipping tariffs and shipping rates and the amount of cargo that will flow through that port. We've reduced that to less than 4 days. We've seen an increase in cargo flowing through the port. We expect that shipping tariffs will reduce. That will make that specific economy more competitive. The country's well positioned to service connectivity into Asia and into the GCC. So I think that can become a landmark. I think where we add efficiency, I think business must be accountable in public-private partnerships to add efficiency and take ownership of that efficiency.
Thanks. Konstantinos, would you like to jump in on the question on challenges in implementation, if you're aware of challenges in implementation of trade agreements?
I would like to say that, yes, I agree that the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is a market that has are 1.4 yes, billion people inside it, and trillions of dollars in GDP. It's a compelling case for investment, and many things should be done inside this free trade area. But of course, the main challenge comes back to the connectivity. If the states are not connected to one each other, if the mainland is not connected to the ports, even with digital infrastructure that we all agree should be expanded, what can be done? So we go back to our first question, is to start not from scratch, to continue working on what has been already achieved, bring in as many partners as possible from the international level, from the international community, and when we have a more clear picture of what can be achieved inside Africa, then see how Africa itself can be connected to the other regions. So I don't want to repeat what has been already said. There are many initiatives going on, there are many projects going on, and we should just focus on what has been already achieved and continue from there.
Perfect. And going to the last question, I'll come to you, Donald. Yes.
Okay. No, thanks very much. Two things I think directed to ourselves. One is to acknowledge and agree that infrastructure development will require of us to, indeed, at a particular point, invite the private sector to come on board. Because the greater economic good, or we can get a greater value when everyone is on board, when all hands are on deck. So we need, that is why in terms of our approach, the South African government's approach, especially in terms of the rail, they are currently trying to see how best can we come with the reforms that invite the private sector to play a role, either in terms of investment, but also in terms of operating some of the areas within that particular space. Now, that's going to be very important because the reality is that you can't do it alone. You need everyone to assist, and we must all accept that the business must accept they have a role to play for economic growth, and as much as government has a role to play to assist the economic growth. So the coming on board of everyone in terms of partnership is going to be very important. Why there has not been progress in terms of the agreements, I think the South African markets and Asia, I think is the question that has been asked. There wouldn't be a specific answer to that. But what we need to zoom into is that over the past 30 years, in the context of South Africa, there would have been various trade agreements signed between the various governments in the Asia continent and South African government and other countries in the region. The question is specific. We need to zoom into specific trade agreement and get to understand what would have made it difficult for these trade agreements to work, and how best can we then come on board to say, because this was a specific challenge, if the challenge was that the goods that we want to send to that particular market did not necessarily get the market, or we did not have a proper legislative support in terms of the intra-country trade, in terms of the agreements that we have signed, we need to come on board to say, what is it that we can do to improve? Because indeed, we need each other. The Asian markets need South African and African markets as much as they need us. So we need each other, and we need to zoom now into that particular space and ask ourselves hard question. It's true, the colleagues from Nigeria is correct. The divides are not only in terms of infrastructure, we also have a digital divides. We have a lot of divides, but we zoomed now in terms of the infrastructure, road connectivity, rail connectivity divide, but we can still zoom into other divides that are there, and I think the digital divide is one of the impediment, but I would have imagined it was not part of the discussion for now, but it's something that obviously, as the conversations goes on, at a particular time we'll have to zoom into that and look into how does it impact on our economies, how it impacts on movement of goods and services across the continent, and how does that undermine the development of the continent.
Yes, I think we have 30 seconds to spare. Constantinos,
Two
you'd
words.
like to, yeah.
Policy harmonization. It applies to everything. It should also apply to infrastructure. and it makes things easier. It's not easy, and it not solves everything, but it's a good start also.
Absolutely, thank you. Thanks a lot, and I think this is a great place to end it. So thanks a lot to my panelists. Maybe you can join me in uploading them.